الحقيقه والايمان. عندما فقدنا الايمان بالله فقدنا رحمته ورضاه. سبحانك الله، يعرفك كل من له قلب صافي، يعرفك القلب بنوره وصفائه، تشهد كل ذرة في الكون بوجودك، والمؤمنين والمتفكرين المتدبرين من عبادك. الحقيقه والايمان. إلى كل من ينكر وجود الله فأقول له: هداك الله بقلب يدرك وجوده. لا علم يدركه ولا عالم، إنما ندركه بقلوبنا. في ملايين من الناس خاضوا تجربة الاقتراب من الموت وعادوا مرة أخرى من الموت، يسموها فترة الكوما. وأثناء الفترة دي استطاعوا أن يدركوا أشياء ويعلموا أشياء فشل العلم في تفسيرها، لأنها لم تكن أوهام بل كانت حقيقة بالإثبات. وشهد الأطباء بأن ما يقولوه صحيح، وفشلوا في تفسير ذلك علميا. وإليكم نموذج منه، وهو دكتور طبيب جراح وأستاذ جامعي خاض بنفسه هذه التجربة ولم يكن يؤمن بها، وكان يقول إنها تخاريف وتأليف. وعندما خاض بنفسه التجربة بقدر إلهي فاستمعوا إلى ما قال.
Doctors at Lynchburg General determined he had a very rare bacterial meningitis. The same night, he went into a coma, and that's when he says he left this world and entered a new one.
It was just the most stunning reality to see. It was much more real than even being here.
The first stage he describes as dark and horrific.
It was deep underground, murky, being dirty jello.
Then he says he was rescued by a spinning bright light.
And as it came towards me, it kind of spun and opened up like this portal into a whole other.
Spent years trying to prove his experience scientifically, but couldn't. The meningitis had turned off his cortex, the part of the brain that controls thought and emotion. And he's convinced his experience was out of body and out of this world.
The fact of the matter is, because I had such a severe meningitis, it helped me to realize it was very real, but it did not happen in my brain.
Beside me, welcome Dr. Eben Alexander. We're so happy to have you here.
Well, thank you, Bob. It's great to be here.
Yeah.
Grew up in a scientific family. My father was an academic neurosurgeon, and he instilled a very strong sense of science as the path to truth. Majored in chemistry, then went to Duke Medical School and did my neurosurgical training at Duke and at Harvard. And then I spent about 15 years on faculty at Harvard Medical School at the Brigham and Women's and the Children's Hospitals, and thought I had a very good idea about how the brain and mind and consciousness all worked. And it was against that background that I then had my NDE that changed everything that I thought about that relationship. Understood it, right. And that meant that there was no real way to explain any kind of an afterlife, no way to explain how soul or spirit or consciousness could live beyond the death of the brain and body.
Well,
that time flow in that realm is completely different and much freer than time flow in the earthly realm. And in fact, from that outer realm, we have access to entities. I mean, it was amazing. I had no memory of my life before, of my earthly existence, although I was made aware of Earth during the journey. A part of what helped make my journey very illustrative of near-death experiences in their ultra reality at large. So that was how to explain that this could have happened in my brain. The conclusion is that it was a very real experience because it really happened. It did not happen in my brain, and it did not happen in the physical universe. And that's a very important thing to take away from my lesson. And even though the meningitis had provided a setting where I did not remember personal details of my existence on earth. There were tremendous lessons that I was taught deep in coma, all about the reasons for our existence on earth, and really the reasons for existence of the whole universe. And in a sense, I would say that my experience is the exception that proves the rule, because it was not your, quote, typical, unquote, near-death experience, and yet by showing that a very rich consciousness exists independent of the brain when the brain is dead. That is the biggest part of the lesson from my journey, which supports the eternity of our consciousness and of our spirit and soul.
First being that you saw, I think again, very compelling evidence that your experience was real and not imagined, is her identity. You mind sharing with us that?
I was adopted. I was put up for adoption when I was 2 weeks old, adopted age 4 months. And for a lot of my life, I looked for my birth mother through the North Carolina Children's Home. North Carolina had pretty strict laws. Never found that there was any interest on her part in finding me. And I adjusted to that. That's fine. I mean, she was going on with her life, and they left me to go on with my life, and I was okay with that. And then my son was doing a research project in school, 6th grade, in the year 2000, when he wanted to find out more about our family heritage. And he wouldn't let it go when I told him about my adoptive family heritage. He wanted to know about our biological family. So I thought I'd humor him. I wrote a letter to the North Carolina Children's Home, and I actually got a response back. Well, yes, we did find something out, and I detail all that in my book. It was a shocking 2 minutes in my life back in February 2000. Finding out that, in fact, my birth parents got married, which was a big, based on all the information I had, that they had 3 children, that my youngest sister had passed over in 1998, and that they were still grieving, and it was not a good time to come back in their lives. And that sent me in a tailspin. That was, in fact, why I lost all faith in a loving, personal God, lost all faith in prayer in 2000. And that was lost for 8 years until my coma. And now, of course, that's all been healed forever. I will never, ever doubt the eternity of our souls and that all-loving God. But it turns out that as I was trying to understand the depth of my experience, and it was clearly a very powerful transcendental experience, and yet as I read more and more about near-death experiences, I was mystified. Why wasn't my father there? My adoptive father had passed over 4 years before my coma. And if I had scripted this, he would have been there front and center, but he was nowhere to be seen. And who was this mysterious girl? I could remember her face so perfectly. I knew I'd never met her in my whole life. So why was she there? And how come my dad wasn't there? And this was, this is a deal breaker. I knew I'd had a profound spiritual experience when my brain should have supported no experience at all. So how come? Why? Such a deep mystery to it. And it was 4 months out from coma when I actually was able to put it all together. My birth sister Kathy had promised to send me a picture of Betsy, the sister who had passed on in 1998. And she did send that picture, and that was a very powerful emotional experience. She just looked so familiar. And it was the next morning when I was reading a story in Elizabeth Kubler-Ross about a girl who had a profound near-death experience, was in coma, and encountered her brother, and he gave her such beautiful unconditional love of that realm, and they had the most adoring time together, and she was so blessed with it. But then he helped her make a decision to go back to Earth, and she did. And when she came back, she was mystified and talking with her father. I don't understand. I don't have a brother. And her father said, well, you did. He died 3 months before you were born, and we never told you about him. And I looked up at that picture that my birth sister had just sent me of my departed birth sister Betsy, and I knew exactly who had been on the butterfly wing. It was the most powerful experience I've ever had in this life. I was absolutely certain of the identity, and yet, since I didn't really know her personality so well, I was just shocked at the power of this. But I said, it can't be. I mean, that's too amazing. And so then I started calling my birth family every week or so. I would call and ask them questions, trying to get to know Betsy better. Yeah, it's such a beautiful message, and in many ways it's so simple. And what my experience very plainly demonstrates is that our consciousness, our spirit, our soul is eternal. We are spiritual beings. It is not dependent on the brain. And we are so much more than our physical bodies. And our true reason for being here as a spirit and soul extends far beyond the simple materialistic view that it just goes birth to death and that's all there is. We are so much more than that. And our relationships with our fellow souls are far richer than that, as is the meaning and the purpose for our being here. In terms of the evil, in terms of the badness, for those who hand out mayhem and pain and agony to others, they end up reaping what they sow, because in the life review, when they leave this body and go through their life review, they end up living that pain and agony that they dished out in every single instance as the recipient. And it's much worse in that pure spiritual realm to feel the agony of that pain that they've caused others. So in that sense, you could, there's a hell. There's not, in my view, there is not the eternal damnation that is pictured in kind of classic Christianity. And the reason for that is this God is so perfect and so loving and so all-powerful that there's no way that part of that creation will be an eternal damnation. This is all about our spirits, our souls ascending in that outer realm and getting closer and closer to that all-loving Godhood. And it has to do with our learning lessons in this life. And that's why I look at hardship, difficulty, challenges, and as a healer, I look at disease. And anyone who's handing out mayhem and pain in this world is going to have to make up for that wrongward direction, either in this life or in other lives. So it's, to me, it all is kind of the way I have to put it together. It does involve reincarnation as a very necessary part of it.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's very comforting to that soul that is being prayed for.
That's really important to hear. A great reminder. Is there a wrong way to pray? Is there a right way to pray?
I think just by believing and by knowing that there's a divine plan, thy will, not mine, be done. For those 8 years before my coma, I'd given up on God, given up on prayer. I was praying for the wrong things, and I was trying to pray for things that, that my ego and self might want, and those prayers went unanswered. And just know there's a divine plan, and just have faith that that love will carry us through whatever we face in this realm. We are loved, cherished, and cared for, and by believing it and then feeling it deep in our own consciousness, feeling that divine connection, quieting that voice, the voice of fear and anxieties, will never prove, pro or con, the existence of that realm. Also, that God is so far beyond our wildest dreams, imaginations as human beings, that to even think that we could come close to proving yes or no is hubris of the highest order.
الحقيقه والايمان.
النور مكانه في القلوب، احضن خلود شمس الغروب، يا تكون قد الحياة يا تعيش وحيد وسط الدروب.
Very strongly, and yet mine also very strongly suggested that this is a real experience in a very real place, more real than this earthly realm, that knowing that's within each and every one of us by being conscious. And that's another blessing from my journey, is you don't have to almost die to get this. In fact, just by being conscious, using centering prayer, deep meditation, These are ways that each and every one of us can get in touch with that absolute connection of that divine within each one of us that is there to give us that knowing of love and of our connectedness to each other and to all that exists. It's an excellent question. I mean, I would point out here that I see, I now see near-death experiences and afterlife reports going back 2,500 years, to the Egyptian Book of the Dead, Plato. I see the similarities far more than I focus on the differences, because I see an underlying reality of an afterlife realm that's very real. It's more real and more fundamental than this earth-like reality that we live in. And I think that's very, very important. It's also important to realize I now see consciousness. I know from my experience, it proved to me that our spirit, our soul is eternal. That consciousness, we are conscious in spite of our brain. And that's a very important concept. The brain is more of a reducing valve, a filter or a veil. And it's there for a purpose. To me, it was not my place to be editing strongly because I thought something would be unpopular. And likewise, I wasn't going to add things in that weren't there.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, say in the fundamentalist Christian realm, would prefer that I had seen Jesus. Well, I'm sorry, I didn't see Jesus, so I didn't put him in there, but I did see a loving God that was every bit the one that Jesus knew and talked about, and that infinitely loving God is exactly who I saw and came to know very deeply, and also came to realize that we all know that God very deeply, and we can get in touch with that deep in our own consciousness. And that's very strongly, and yet mine also very strongly suggested that this is a real experience in a very real place, more real than this earthly realm, and that it really happened and did not happen in my brain, nor in the physical universe. And that's when I started to really appreciate the power of what my story was telling me. And I resisted the thought, oh, this happened for some purpose. I was a physician, scientist looking at this and trying to be objective as I could. And with that mindset, to think that there was something.
الحقيقه والايمان من بين نور شمس لا ينفذ ولهيبها الجبار، وماء عذب وشجر وبحار، وضياء قمر وسحاب، ورعد وبرق وأمطار، وجبال، ووديان ساحرة، وخلق عجيب، دقة التصميم المدهشة، سر الحياة والوجود المعجزة، براعة التكوين وجماله، كل شيء صنع بمقدار، غاية في الدقة لا عوج فيها، كل يسير بقدر معلوم، غير ظالم ولا مظلوم. الظلم صناعة الإنسان، يريد أن يكون ولا يريد أن يعمل حتى يكون، شباب بلا أمل يريد بلا عمل. أيها الشاب، صدق أو لا تصدق، فالله موجود، واحمي نفسك من نفسك. نفسك هي أكبر عدو لك، وأطع والديك، فلن تجد في الدنيا كلها من يحبك أكثر منه. الحقيقه والايمان. لما أنا ما خلقتش نفسي ولا خلقت مخي، يبقى اتحاسب ليه؟ ده سؤال الفيديو الجاي إن شاء الله. وبشكر كل الناس اللي عملوا اشتراك في القناة، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.